Today we're going to talk about strategies for overcoming emotional overwhelm, particularly cognitive therapies that we can use to get ourselves out of situations in which we feel like we don't have control over how we feel, over our bodies, and over our minds. Most people, and particularly people with mental suffering, are really good at feeling like crap. And they're also really good at blaming themselves for it. And as we get older, negative emotions can get twisted from feeling like bullies. Like when we're children, negative emotions just kind of push us around and it's difficult to understand, and they sort of take control of us. They turn from a pathology to a baseline state of life, okay? And anxiety can transform from normal worry that indicates some truth about the world to us to a state of being. And we get so good at feeling terrible that it actually feels second nature to us. It feels normal. It feels like something that ought not to be augmented. It feels like the state of human nature, that is mental suffering, and blaming ourselves for mental suffering. And so chronically feeling bad is a state of mind that can steal the light from our eyes and steal an optimism from us so severely and so profoundly that we forget feeling good is even possible. Okay, so we turn to destructive allies to rescue us from these tar pits of despair that we get into. Allies who cost us more than they give, like alcohol and television and social media, and gorging ourselves with food. And everybody has chosen a poison or two that they use to take the edge off, right? But it usually just sinks us deeper into that emotional hole, down into darkness, one numbing agent at a time. And the reason we turn to these costly numbing agents is because we aren't good at feeling good. We have to outsource the process of feeling good to something else. So we turn to these addictions to make us feel better. The way we turn to a plumber when our pipes burst. Okay, I need you to immediately fix my problem. It's urgent. And we're good at feeling bad and numbing bad feelings because that's what we spend most of our time doing. We're skilled. We're like ninjas at feeling bad and blaming ourselves for feeling bad and then numbing the guilt and the feeling. So feeling good is harder than feeling bad because we're practiced at it. We're skilled. We forget what it is like to have a choice in the matter because we're actually so unskilled at being good. It's common for people to come to expect life to feel like crap all day, every day, because that is their second nature. It's become that second nature, okay? We can call this the practice principle, okay? Humans are prone to do what they're good at, right? Every single one of us is like the Michael Phelps of feeling like crap. It's our genetic gift. It's hardwired into us. It's on our muscle memory, okay? We have a knee-jerk feeling. It's likely a negative, numbing, or a muted positive emotion. Usually feeling great. Whenever we can attain to that, usually feeling really good is short-lived. And it is a short-lived reward at the end of some meaningful striving. But before we try feeling good, okay, we first have to come to terms with the fact that it is a skill that we must learn, at which we are probably very unskilled. So first we need to wrestle with this psychological fact, which is this: bad is stronger than good. Okay, now this sounds like the opposite of what you might think you need to hear right now, but it's actually the truth. And before you face any kind of inner darkness in a profound way, you have to know your enemy. Okay? Thank you, Rage Against the Machine. Psychologically speaking, the darkness is stronger than the light. Okay? It's well known among psychologists, a common trope, right? Negative thoughts stick to your mind like Velcro. Positive thoughts bounce right off like Teflon. Common metaphor, right? Positive emotions are like a dream in the night. Negative emotions are like the shackles that we too often wake up to see, just binding us to some cold reality, right? But positive emotions like love and joy and thankfulness and peace and security, satisfaction, joy, right? How long do those last? Like a moment? A day at most? A weekend? Probably not. What about their opposites, okay? So we talked about love, talked about joy, talked about peace, equanimity, right? What are their opposites? Guilt, fear, anxiety, regret, sadness, lethargy, despair. It's just more and more common for people to experience these emotions, not just for a moment, not just for a day. Some people experience these emotions for literally decades, unceasing. That's why Andrew Solomon, he's an author, right? He calls depression the noonday demon. Okay, positive emotions don't really earn titles of that are like unbreakably tormentive. Okay, people come up with whole archetypal philosophical categories for understanding their negative emotions, right? As Dexter calls it, my dark passenger, my shadow self, the rot inside, right? These are all metaphors that people use, which imply the exacerbation of their presence, the irrevocability of their presence in the psyche. And our language for positive emotions is very fragile, right? A warm feeling, a stillness, my safe place. These feel very breakable. All these metaphors suggest their imminent entropic demise in the absence of upkeep. And the difference between negative and positive emotions is depicted most elementally by, well, their most fitting representational colors, like black and white, respectively, right? And even just the metaphor of the shade black obscures beauty and makes surroundings harder to appreciate, right? It dims eyesight. Black makes ugliness and chaos harder to identify and harder to eradicate, right? The shade black represents pure, actuated possibility, which translates into us psychologically as real and present danger looming over you and within you and near you, right? It's dark. It's the darkness. That's why there's no, concept of being afraid of the light. You're afraid of the dark. It represents pure, unbiased, threatening possibility. White, on the other hand, as a shade, it frames. It focuses. It highlights every mark it bears, right? It maximizes contrast. It represents pure, unbiased possibility, okay? It draws attention to the smallest variance in its presence. It's easily soiled and represents the ideal of perfection. It is luminescent, but it is also very, very fragile. Okay, and when it comes to emotions, psychologists call this the positive-negative asymmetry effect, which has been repeatedly confirmed in psychological research. And there was an infamous psychology article published called Bad is Stronger Than Good, which details the data and theories behind this very simple and potent notion, which is namely this, that darkness is a far stronger psychological power than light. One psychological theory suggests the opposite of this, okay? And it's called avoidance theory. And one article in particular postulates that humans by nature avoid negativity. And this would kind of seem to contradict this notion that bad is stronger than good, right? This should sort of theoretically contradict the notion that bad events have a stronger effect on the mind than positive events. So don't avoidance theory and the asymmetry, the positive negative asymmetry effect, don't these sort of contradict one another? Not necessarily, okay? So which is stronger, bad or good? Who's right, avoidance or asymmetry? Well, bad is still stronger, but the way I understand it is that it turns out that the avoidance behavior in avoidance theory, in which humans actually try to avoid darkness, is actually a feature of the badness. It's a function of the asymmetry effect. Okay? So, for example, one author named James Pennebaker has become a renowned psychologist for his discovery of the relationship between trauma disclosure and medical health. Okay, between telling the truthfulness about your abusive or traumatic situations and your actual physical medical condition. There is a relationship between those two things. Okay, and Pennebaker found that among survivors of trauma, groups who merely wrote about their trauma experience utilized medical services significantly less than those who did not write about them. And those who utilized psychotherapy saw an even greater effect. In other words, avoidance of evil manifested as a minimization or a toughing through the pain isn't an example of good beating bad, but of bad becoming larger than life. So there's one article by a psychologist and his team named Baumeister who makes the interesting point that we have, if you think about this conceptually or semantically, we have no antonym for the word trauma. Trauma refers to the devastating, potentially decades-long consequences of an overwhelming event that it can have on the psyche, right? But we don't have a word. There's no opposite of that, okay? We don't have a word for a life-transforming, unstoppable positive effects because of an overwhelmingly positive experience, because positive experiences have a far less durable effect on the psyche. And all of this is basically intended to explain a simple fact about human life, that we are fundamentally prone to feel like crap. It distorts the way that we see the world. And we have to actively work against the way that pain and suffering can shape our perceptions of ourselves and our perceptions of the world. So trauma and pain and suffering make their mark on us. But happiness and security and love, they just drown in this sea of darkness. So when we wake up in the morning, the only thing the only way we are going to feel good is if we fight to feel good. So in a Jungian sense, we sort of have to like wake up and slay the dragon of negative emotions every single day, right? It's not going to come natural to us to feel good. I wish it were the other way around, but unfortunately, life and human psychology is just bent to more easily congeal with the darkness and with the negative emotions. But there were 10 tactics that were developed by a psychiatrist named David Burns, originally in his book, Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, which was used as a control for a lot of studies on the effectiveness of therapy. And what happened was the use of David Burns's book for dealing with negative emotions was so effective that it actually outperformed therapy in many cases and actually made many prospective therapeutic clients feel as if they didn't need any therapy at all. So he came up with these 10 cognitive tactics for identifying ways that we distort the world and the ways that we can overcome those distortions. So first, we have to understand what tools that we instinctively distort the world toward the negative, and then 10 tactics that we can use to sort of slay the dragon of negative emotions or undo or unweave or untangle the effects of our instinctual distortion of the world, okay? So first, these are the 10 tactics that our inner dragon, that our inner darkness uses against us to distort the world, okay? First, these are 10 ways that we go wrong, okay? 10 ways that we distort the world, okay? 10 regular logical fallacies that we use to misconstrue the world so that it looks worse and scarier and more despairing than it really is, okay? The first is all or nothing thinking, okay? So you turn every situation into a black and white issue, okay? If something isn't perfect, it's a disaster, right? If someone is discourteous toward you or maybe a little bit rude, they're pure evil, right? There's no room for gray, no middle ground, no room for mixing. Everything is black and white. Everything is the like a superlative version of what it really is, okay? So that's all or nothing thinking. The second is overgeneralization. So you perceive a single negative event as basically an unstoppable habit of defeat that will drag you down to psychological hell, right? So if something didn't go just right, or if Starbucks give you the wrong coffee, or if you got in a little fight with your spouse in the morning, the rest of the day is ruined. Nothing else is worth anything. It just incites in you this sense of grandiose implications which are inordinate and inappropriate to the original inciting event. Okay, overgeneralization. Okay. 3, mental filter. You know what? Another note on overgeneralization. Overgeneralization can also be one in which you identify a negative act that you perform, right? Like, let's say, it's one in which you give into an addiction that you ought rather not give into. And then what you do is you overgeneralize that to say, oh, I always do this. I'm always bad. I'm always the worst. And so what you do is you overgeneralize or overreach the implications of one single event to make it mean more than it can mean, which traps you in an identity that you don't really deserve. Okay. So that's another means of cognitive distortion. 3rd, mental filter. Okay. So what this means is you identify a single aspect of a situation and you use that as a lens through which you see the entire situation. Okay. So like a drop of food coloring that kind of changes everything. You let one minor negative detail ruin what might be 99% good. Okay. And you're sort of like a bloodhound, like sniffing out that negative detail, and it ruins everything. Okay. Number 4, you disqualify the positive. Disqualifying the positive. What this means is you don't acknowledge the good. Okay. You don't acknowledge the positive. You don't acknowledge the optimistic. You always find reasons to tell yourself that the optimistic idea doesn't count. Doesn't count. You literally discount the existence of good in the world by the way that you construe the world. And as far as you're concerned, good might as well not even exist for you. Okay. 5th way that we distort the world cognitively is jumping to conclusions. So you assume the worst. Even if you have very little evidence to support your assumption, you assume the worst. When people challenge this assumption, you basically just dig your heels in further and you convince yourself even more deeply that you are right. Okay? And there are sort of 2 ways that you do this. One way of jumping to conclusions is that you presume to be a mind reading, okay? And basically what this means is you arbitrarily conclude that someone is like reacting negatively to you, and you don't even bother to like maybe check your facts, right? You just mind read and then decide, you know what? They did this to me. They intended to do this to me, and I don't have an open mind about it. I'm going to assume the worst about their intentions, and that's that, right? So you're jumping to conclusions by assuming that you're a mind reader. You could also jump to conclusions by assuming that you're a fortune teller, okay? So you anticipate that events will turn out badly, and you feel convinced that your predictions are, basically just an already established fact. And so you jump to conclusions by assuming that you're a mind reader by looking into the future, even though the future hasn't happened yet, okay? 6th, magnification or minimization, okay? Basically what this is this psychologists sometimes call this catastrophizing. And what this means is that you exaggerate the significance of events. Like you exaggerate your mistakes, and then you exaggerate your mistakes and you exaggerate someone else's successes, right? Or you shrink the good things about you so that they appear small, your good traits, and then you also shrink someone else's undesirable traits, right? So that no matter what happens, you always feel like you're the worst and everybody else so much better than you, and you're always trying to compensate for that insecurity. 7th, emotional reasoning. You assume that the way your negative emotions necessarily reflect the way that things really are. So you say, I feel it, therefore it must be true. That's emotional reasoning, rather than double checking, okay, are the facts my emotions are presenting to me the facts of the world? So why would I react to the world as if my emotions were telling me the truth when they've clearly misled me before? But no, emotional reasoning. It's very easy to be led down that road. Number 8, should statements. Should statements. Okay, so you try to motivate yourself with should statements and shouldn't statements, as if basically as if you had to be like whipped and punished before you could be expected to do anything, right? So like you tell yourself like you must do this and you ought to do this, right? So the emotional consequence is often guilt. So basically guilt becomes like the slave master of your life. And when you direct should statements toward others, then you feel anger and frustration and resentment. And not only do you start dealing with yourself in terms of should and guilt and ought and must, but that's how it starts trickling into your relationships. And those are the terms on which you relate to everybody else around you. Okay. 9, labeling and mislabeling. Okay, so this is an extreme form of overgeneralization. So instead of maybe just admitting to a mistake that you made, you attach a label to yourself, a card to your forehead, right? I'm a loser. And when someone else's behavior, it irritates you, right? Then you attach a negative label to them, right? Like, he is a freaking idiot. He is so negligent. He is so inconsiderate, right? And so mislabeling often involves describing an event with language that is highly colored and emotionally loaded. And when we tend to think of things in terms of what they are and what labels they deserve, we close off elements of truthfulness about a situation, which are mixed. And we will misconstrue this situation. That's why labeling, mislabeling are a cognitive distortion, because actually using labels closes your eyes to truth. Okay. 10 is personalization. What this means is that you see yourself as the cause for some external negative events, which you in fact were not primarily responsible for. So you end up personalizing everything and thinking that it's your fault that everything else is happening in the world, and then you constantly feel guilty all the time. Okay? So those are the 10 ways that we primarily cognitively distort the world through thinking about it the wrong way. Okay? All or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, the mental filter where we focus on one thing and use it as a lens to see everything and negate the good, right? 4th is disqualifying the positive. 5th is jumping to conclusions through mind reading or through being a fortune teller, right? 6th is magnifying or minimizing, magnifying what's bad about us and minimizing what's good about us, right? We call that catastrophizing. 7th is emotional reasoning. 8th is should statements. 9th is labeling and mislabeling, and 10th is personalization. So cognitive distortions that cause depression are usually rooted in the same thing, okay? The belief that you're worth nothing. And the solution is not emotional self-discovery, because many people become trapped in therapy for decades, uncovering every detail of their past pain and putting it under a microscope when they feel the reason that they went to therapy, was to think and feel and behave differently. But they end up just falling into this sort of therapy trap, right? And psychological self-discovery can be a helpful tool for self-improvement, but it's not a substitute for action. It's not, and too often therapists and clients of therapists get duped into thinking that simply rummaging around in our emotional, storage box in our childhood can substitute for actually changing our behavior, changing our action, changing the way that we view the world, undoing these cognitive distortions that can so often sabotage us and perpetuate our trauma and perpetuate our pain. So instead of fighting back against your internal vacuum of negative self-talk with cathartic self-discovery, right? Self-discovery is fine, but you should get tactical about how to fight back against negative emotions, right? About how to slay that dragon. And yes, okay, so negative emotions aren't just something that you need to fight. They can also be telling you something good, right? So negative emotion, you don't just want to reject and fight negative emotions, but we're talking about negative emotions which constitute a mood, which constitute a baseline mood, which manifest themselves as cognitive distortions that skew our eyes to reality. So for example, if you were to experience grief after the death of a loved one, right? It's like, well, do we want to negate that grief? Do we want to stop feeling that as soon as possible? Well, maybe in a sense, but also in another sense, it's healthy to feel that grief for a certain season of time, right? So we're not talking about eradicating negative emotions. We're talking about undoing negative emotions which have rooted themselves in the psyche as a mood and a baseline disposition, which ends up distorting reality and ruining your life. Okay, so negative emotions are important insofar as they have something important to tell us, but they are dangerous in their ability to overwhelm us and to trap us so that we are hypnotized by them. And listening to negative emotions is no easy skill. So you can't face a reality that you can't see. So in order to sort of increase your chances of getting on top of these negative moods and these negative emotions, and we're about to look at these mood sheets, these exercises, and a particular exercise that you can do to undo the cognitive distortions that we just talked about. And patients who regularly perform these exercises were actually 3 times more likely to report drastic decrease in depression. Okay, we're going to use this exercise. Okay, when you're overwhelmed with a negative feeling, you're going to write down 3 things. Okay, the first thing you write down is your automatic thought. Okay, not the feeling that you have, but the thought behind it. Okay, so when you feel guilty, don't write down what's your first automatic thought. It's not, I feel guilty. No, your first thought is, I never do anything right. Right? That might be your automatic thought. Okay, and then what's your second thought? So remember, your first thought is the proposition behind the feeling. Okay, the second thought is you have to identify the cognitive distortion beneath the automatic thought. Okay. And then 3, the rational response to that cognitive distortion. So if your automatic thought is, I never do anything right, well, that's an overgeneralization, which is the second cognitive distortion we mentioned, right? Because you do some things right sometimes, which means that the rational response is, well, that's a bunch of nonsense because I do a lot of things right, okay? So now you can approach the original feeling and say, okay, well, the propositional logic behind this feeling is false. And that gives you credibility to sort of prosecute that negative mood and say, okay, you don't have credibility here anymore. And you go through that process. What's your automatic propositional thought behind the emotion? What's the cognitive distortion that it commits? And what's the rational response to that automatic thought based on that cognitive distortion? Okay. So ground your overwhelm in this chart. Don't let it fester in abstraction. Don't let your feeling remain unambiguous, or don't let your feeling remain sort of just an ambiguous weight in your chest. Articulate it. Okay. Don't let it keep you in a chokehold from the unseen. Okay. Ground your emotion with articulation and with an evaluation of the cognitive distortion that it commits and with a rational response. Prosecute it with logic, because when you make your enemy seen, he looks kind of silly and he looks kind of stupid, and then you can move on more easily. So here now we're going to sort of list 10 practical ways that you can implement rational strategies to overcome these 10 cognitive distortions that we already mentioned. Okay, here's the first. Number 1, talk back to your internal critic. Okay, don't just accept your thoughts as true. Don't even accept them as yours. Just like with relationships, you need to set up healthy boundaries with your own emotions, okay? You wouldn't let someone boss you around and call you a loser, okay? So why do you let your emotions do it to you, okay? So number 1, talk back to your internal critic. Number 2, examine the evidence behind your feelings, okay? Do you feel that bad? Do you feel bad because of a handful of things? If so, be a good scientist. Tell yourself, okay, most of the time I'm good at this. I've just failed a few times. So I'm not going to tell myself, oh, I do this all the time. No, I don't do it all the time. I've done it a couple times, and that's bad. But you know what? That doesn't make me a bad person. Or, maybe you really are bad at something, but it's just trivial, okay? So maybe you're often late to things. And when you are late to things, you think of yourself, oh, I'm the worst person in the world. I'm the worst friend in the world, right? But if you really think about it rationally, it's like, okay, you're late to things a lot. So what? Does that really make you that terrible of a person? A lot of people are great at a lot of stuff, right? You're probably committing a catastrophization. You're probably magnifying the degree to which other people show up on time, which is actually less often than you think it is. And you're probably minimizing other good qualities about you that make you a good friend. And you're probably maximizing the value that other people place on your showing up late. You think, oh, everybody thinks I'm such a loser for showing up late all the time, or they think I'm really inconsiderate. No, people understand. Generally, people understand, okay? A third method that you can use to overcome cognitive distortion is the double standard method, okay? So examine how you talk to yourself and then ask, would I talk the way I talk to myself to a little kid, okay? So would I look at a little kid who's like 5 or 6, starry-eyed kid, he's a cute kid, I'm talking to him, right? Would I say, you know what? You're a loser. There's no hope. You're worthless. Just give up. No, you'd be cruel. You'd be a jerk, right? You're just as valuable as that little kid, okay? You deserve as much love and hope and opportunity as anyone else, okay? You haven't ruined your life. Okay. You're just a little further down the road. Okay. Hope and value as a human being is not age specific. Okay. Number 4, use the experimental technique. Okay. So try to test your hypothesis within your negative emotion. Okay. What that means is poke the thing that makes you the most terrified. Okay. Anxiety will always be bigger than in your imagination than in real life. So don't give bad feelings the satisfaction of having more power than they deserve. If your bad feelings are going to make you feel terrible, you make them work for it, okay? Make them show up and prove their legitimacy, because the chances are they don't have what it takes actually to do so, okay? So test your hypothesis. Can they really show up? Can they really bring the evidence? Can they really do what it takes to show you that they deserve to be heard? Probably not. Okay, 5, start thinking in shades of gray, okay? Do your emotions often swing between ultimate victory and complete failure? Okay, this is basically a sign that your thoughts are being distorted by an extremist filter, right? By that first cognitive distortion, black and white thinking, right? And black and white evaluations are a result of lazy self-reflection, okay? If it's bad, let's just call it the worst. Well, and if it's good, well, it's my savior. Not quite, okay? How might a balanced person who wasn't destroyed by every failure and vindicated by every victory, right? How might a balanced person take your situation in stride? It's worth thinking about, okay? So one tool you could say, one manifestation of thinking in shades of gray is you could ask yourself, okay, how would a balanced person process this situation, okay? Number 6 is the survey method, okay? If you think that your anxieties and your thoughts about yourself are abnormal, ask a trusted friend if they've ever felt that way. And chances are they have. So it's as simple as just reaching out to someone else, that you trust with a text and say, hey man, I feel this way. Have you ever felt this way? Chances are they absolutely have. Okay. You feel less isolated, you feel less alone, and you get more of a sense of solidarity with other normal people in the world. Okay. And then your anxieties and your emotions don't feel so powerful, right? Because you look at other people, think, okay, they feel the same way. They're functioning. I can do this too. All right. 7th tactic, define your terms. What actual names are you calling yourself? What actual things are you thinking about yourself, right? What names are you calling other people? Define those terms. What is a loser? How do you cross the boundary from non-loser to loser, right? How do you, what's the difference between being a loser and going through a rough patch? Who decided that, right? And what do you have to lose by explaining your current experience as a season, it's like a rough patch, as opposed to a state of existence, a loser, right? Like, what do you really gain from calling yourself a loser? And is it really accurate? And who made those decisions, right? Couldn't you think of yourself in a way that's less judgmental, that also facilitates more of a sense of trajectory and hopefulness out of your situation? Why have you closed yourself in semantically with this label, loser, bad person? Why? What is that label doing for you? Because you don't have to use it on yourself, okay? Number 8, the semantic method. Okay, so substitute all the language that you use that's loaded, okay, and that is removed and that is emotionally charged against you, and instead insert language that is scientific and neutral and objective, okay? The words that you use can actually change the emotion that you feel, okay? Instead of calling a group of people, those assholes, refer to them by their proper name. And select adjectives about them that are descriptive rather than labeling. Okay, so instead of calling someone like abusive or something like that, try using balanced descriptions which explain his or her abusiveness. So instead of saying, so instead of saying like, oh, that person's a psychopath, right? You could say, well, that person's good at performance, but they're bad at empathy. You could say someone is peaceable, but harmfully neglectful. Okay? You could say someone is well-meaning, but hurtful. Okay? And when your critical vocabulary is balanced with a positive evaluation, when it's front-loaded with a positive evaluation, it actually gives more weight to the criticism. So when all your words are critical, well, it cheapens sort of what you're trying to communicate. So frame your negative concern with a canvas of neutral and positive evaluation. Okay. Nobody's Satan incarnate. Okay. Nobody's Jesus Christ incarnate. Okay. Couch your point of concern in a sense of reality and in a sense of balance, and couch your criticism with in an overall positive evaluation. Number 9, reattribution. Okay. Don't just assume I'm the worst. Okay. Examine how the negative situation came to pass and how you can fix it. All right. Don't fixate on the feeling itself. Direct that energy toward a solution, okay? So don't see a negative feeling as worthwhile fixating upon as an end in and of itself, right? Say, okay, well, if this is a problem, what's the solution? If I had infinite resources, what would the solution be? Okay, well, since I don't have infinite resources, how could I mimic that solution with my finite resources? And eventually you'll come up with a strategy that actually works for you, okay? Number 10, do a cost-benefit analysis. Basically, define the positive and negative consequences of your emotion, okay? And then you say, okay, this is what I'm actually paying to feel this right now. This is what I'm paying. I'm paying a positive experience with my family right now just so I can sit in this negative emotion, right? What am I getting out of it? Well, I'm really just getting a sense of my own victimhood out of it. Okay, so this is costing me more than I want, and I'm not really getting from it all that I wish I could get from it, okay? So you can use this cost-benefit analysis to modify self-defeating beliefs like, I must always be perfect. What are you getting out of that? A little bump in performance, but what is it costing you? Constant anxiety, constant worry. It's not really worth the price. That little bump in performance isn't really worth the price, especially because you could probably get it elsewhere from another belief with a much lower cost. Okay. So also from that cost benefit analysis, what you could do is say, what other belief could I believe that would give me the same price and a much lower, or that would give me the same value, or that from which I could get out of the same effect, but at a much lower emotional existential cost. Okay. So those are the 10 tactics that you can use to overcome cognitive distortions, okay? Talk back to your internal critic, examine the evidence, the double standard method, the experimental technique, right? Kick the tires of your negative emotions. Number 5, try thinking in shades of gray rather than black and white. 6, do the survey method, reach out to a friend, basically. 7, define your terms. Don't let yourself be lazy with the language that you use in regard to your own emotions, right? Sort of question whether or not certain labels are the best, or whether you can use different words that don't have such high cost, right? 8, the semantic method, okay? Try couching all your criticism in an overall positive evaluation of something, or try casting your negative emotion as a means by which you experience a more positive emotion, right? 9, reattribution, which is reattribute to your emotion its function as a prompt for solution rather than that as something that has a worthwhile feeling in and of itself. Okay, so reattribute to that meaning a function of problem-solving motivation rather than, I should just sit in this negative emotion. And then 10, do a cost-benefit analysis. See what this emotion's costing you, or this belief is costing you, right? See what you're getting from it, and try to see if there is a different fundamental belief that can produce for you the same benefit. Okay, feeling good is like a martial art. Okay, it doesn't come naturally to anybody. Okay, you have to learn not only the active skill of fighting false beliefs, which are cognitive distortions, which produce negative emotions, which turn into baseline moods. Okay, not only do you have to learn the active skill of disarming that bomb, but you also have to engage defensively with all other kinds of attacks, internal and external. Okay, make this the goal of your life, to become a black belt in feeling good. Okay, if you do, life will still be hard, because bad will always still be stronger than good psychologically. You'll always be more inclined and more incentivized to believe the worst and to catastrophize, and we are just wired to commit these cognitive distortions. But it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener at war. And what that means is this: have the equipment to disarm these cognitive distortions, and don't submit yourself to the mercy of these cognitive distortions, which cost so much more than they are worth. They require from you so much more than they give. Okay? Become an emotional warrior on your own behalf, and then you will accomplish peace. Again, life will not be easy, but it will be so much better for you. Become an emotional warrior, not against yourself, but on behalf of yourself.